Hi, Olly McNamee here, Senior Editor at ComicCon.com. And today I have a very, very special guest, a guest I've been trying to hunt down for a good 4 or 5 years. And that guest is Mr. Mark Millar. Thanks for joining us, Mark. I take it you're going to have loads of busy plans for the summer now. I mean, you've got 3 books out in quick concession next week, 7th of August, and then the 24th of August. Now, I've read them all because I was very fortunate enough to get copies, but I
Yeah.
really don't know how much I can say before I release the first review on Monday
Yeah.
for Nemesis Rogues Gallery. All I can say is he's still a savage little motherfucker, isn't he? And can you elaborate on that any more than that? Because I don't feel any safer than saying he's a, and that's a good pull quote if you want to quote me, savage motherfucker.
It's great because what I love about doing multiple books is everyone appeals to a different part of your personality as a writer, you know? And I love doing Starlight. I love doing Superman Adventures. I love doing this stuff. But there is something fun about doing something like Nemesis. It's a bit like when I did The Authority or Kick Ass or Wanted or something, you know? It's the stuff you shouldn't really be able to get away with in comic books that you somehow do, you know? So yeah, I had a ball doing it. And my God, how good is the artwork? The artwork is
It's really amazing. I think that extra level of realism, particularly the splash page that I'm not going to mention, it,
yeah.
it really levels up the gore in my feelings.
Ah,
You know, it just feels more visceral. I'm quoting
yeah.
my own review here because it's a great way to get questions out. But I don't think I'm going to need to field very many questions. Where did you find him?
Well, it's funny because some people say social media is a waste of time, but it's not. Like I find these guys on my timeline sometimes, and this happened with a few people. I mean, it happens sometimes that I think I've discovered someone, and then I found out it's Gerardo Zaffino, you know, a picture he did in 1978, or a classic Mobius picture I've never seen before, you know. But then sometimes you do stumble across a new genius who most people don't know yet. So Valerio has been building a reputation in the Italian sort of art scene, the comic art scene. And I just saw some pictures that he did a Spawn or something. I can't remember, a couple of years ago, and I was like, this guy's amazing, you know. So I've
Yeah.
started following him, and what I'll do sometimes in the morning about 10:30 when I take my first break, I go and I make a cup of tea and I sit and treat myself to looking at comic art and people's timelines, you know. And I remember just working my way back, thinking, hang on, this guy should be drawing Batman or something. I mean, this guy is absolutely amazing. And I dropped him a line and I said, do you want to do a cover? He did one of the variant covers for the Ambassadors. And I thought he needs to be doing a regular book. I mean, this guy should be doing something here. And I couldn't get him drawing Batman out of my head because it felt like it was
Okay.
a cross between Neil Adams and Frank Miller, but by way of an old 1970s Marvel magazine. It had a John Bolton, John Ridgway
Mm,
vibe to it and everything as well. And
yeah,
I just
man.
loved him. And he was luckily nobody had signed him up yet. And I was like, I'm getting in here. It's a bit like, you know, whenever somebody's discovered Glenn Powell recently and then suddenly he's the next big thing. I feel I've
Yeah.
got in just the right time with Valerio. Yeah.
I like the way, actually, when you mention those 70s Marvel magazines, and particularly John Bolton when he did Classic X-Men, because I think that's the
Yeah.
first time I ever see John Bolton doing pen and ink. I was just so used to all his painted work. And yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. He's got that vibe about him, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I don't know, sometimes you just got to trust your gut, right? And when I go to the comic store now, I've been buying a lot of back issues. So, and okay, one that's been middle aged, right? That's what you do, you know.
Yeah, man.
But the other thing is that stuff is really good, right? And
Yeah.
and I missed a lot of that stuff. Like when I was a kid, I had a very like all children had a very finite amount of money, right? So
Yes.
I only had enough money to buy the comics that Superman was in, really, you know. So I bought all the Superman related comics. I remember I used to look at the Marvel magazines and I'd be like, oh, I think I'm a bit too young for these. I knew in my heart this is for older kids, you know.
Mm.
But now I'm one of the older kids, you know, and I love every time I'm in the comic store and I see a Savage Sword of Conan or you know one of the Marvel Monster mags or something, I'm in there, I'm buying it.
Isn't that interesting? Because I'm very fortunate. I've got two Oxfam shops neck close to me, and for the past
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, they've been shoving in quite battered old copies of Detective, Batman, Superman. Again, all from the 70s, just before I picked them up. And of
Oh
course,
wow.
I don't care that they're overpriced because it's money
Yeah.
going to charity. But I'm
Yeah.
finding myself spending more of my money on these old comics than
Yeah.
am I new comics. I mean, I'm very fortunate as a reviewer to get a lot of PDFs, but
Yeah.
I think it's that middle age thing. You begin to look back fondly on your life as well as looking forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was getting, and going back to Nemesis Rogues Gallery, what I was getting was a really great vibe of elements of Batman
Mhm.
that you've explored a little bit before, kind of that Ra's al Ghul vibe. But
Yeah.
of course, something that should be a no-brainer that's revealed on the final 2 pages that it still hit me between the eyes. I
Yeah.
thought, oh right, oh yeah, I've not thought about that because I was enjoying Nemesis too much.
Well, that's great because that was always my plan, and I haven't done anything in the publicity about those last 2 pages. So, because you think it's about one thing, and then you find
Indeed.
out, oh, it's actually about much more than this as well. So it's good, And these days, it's very hard to pull a surprise off, But I think there's a nice little surprise at the end of this, and it's a cool character. Where this goes is bonkers.
Right, I'm really looking forward to it. And of course, that's it. I mean, with all 3 of your issues, all of the twists, for me anyway, they're very satisfying. Like I said, I didn't see that one coming. Of course, moving on very briefly, because I dare say we'll jump between all 3 onto
Yeah.
Nightclub 2, which I absolutely love. That whole sort of Spidey vibe, Teen Titan vibe, even the blast of colour, because a lot of it takes place at night time,
Yeah.
still comes through. These are kids, and it's reflected in the artwork as well. These are kids that are thoroughly enjoying themselves at what they're doing, a bit like Peter Parker. What's going through your head when you're coming to create what I think is quite a unique take on both vampirism and superheroism, and trying to put that joy that they've got, I suppose, of feeling invulnerable like teenagers do, even without superpowers?
Yeah. I love writing teenagers, I think it's because probably my personality roughly stopped when I was about 16 or 17 or something. Basically everything I like is the stuff that you would like if you were 16 or
Yeah.
17. So I can completely relate to it. And for some reason, I remember it really well. I remember being 16 so much more vividly than I remember being 32. I can't really think of what I did at 32, or 28 or whatever. But 16, everything's very powerful that's going on in your life at that time. It's maybe the hormone surges or whatever, But it's a very vivid time. And luckily, it's also bang on the target demographic of the American comic book audience too,
Mm.
So you're tapping into that Spidey market, which is a lot of fun. I did it on Kick-Ass as well. But what makes this fun is when I was a kid, I remember actually thinking, there's a stupid things you think about in your way to school. And I remember thinking, if I get bit by a vampire, I feel really bad killing people, and these kind of things you think about when you're walking around. And I was like, yeah, I think I would find other ways to get blood, So the stories that I came from there, and it's the idea that I would use those powers to get into a blood bank and, drink the blood that the hospitals got stored that people have been donating. Then I would feel guilty about doing that because I'm doing something that's kind of illegal. And I would think, well, I'd maybe then try and help people to balance this out, and that's your sort of Spider-Man take on it. And it occurred to me that vampires and superheroes actually have this incredible crossover. And it
Mm.
seems weird in a way that although superheroes have encountered vampires before in the story, we've never seen a vampire story done in the style of a superhero story. And yet they have powers, they have vulnerabilities, like the cross, garlic, silver, all these things have not been able to cross running water. All these things are like kryptonite or wood for Green Lantern or yellow for Green Lantern and so on, like it's classic superhero tropes. So the thing genuinely wrote itself. It was the easiest thing I've ever written.
Wow. I like the juxtaposition they're building up between obviously Danny and Amy, who realise with great power comes responsibility, and then
Yeah.
Sam, who, based on teenage jealousy, is turning into another shitbag, isn't he?
That's it. I love the idea of like vampirism, just what would really happen in real life. Like Kick-Ass was okay. This is if you've really got superpowers. If you've really went out and tried to be a superhero. Similarly with this, I just thought, well, you're not going to be that sensible. If one of your friends or a girl you're going out with says, "Will you make me into a vampire?" You'll be like, "Yeah, all right, okay." You'll just do it.
Yeah.
And if they moan to you enough, you'll be like, "Oh, look, I shouldn't do it." Okay, right, well, I'll go ahead and I'll do it. And that's the reality of the situation. And before you know it, I think vampirism would spread through your high school like an STD. It would be
Or
half the
smoking
school
fags
would...
and vaping. It's that same
And I
peer
loved it.
pressure.
And then everything suddenly gets really heightened because you've got this Karate Kid style scenario. You've got the jocks and you've got the nerds and all this kind of stuff. And everything just goes up a notch because when the nerds get superpowers, Suddenly the jocks are
Mm.
scared. But then what happens when the jocks get superpowers as well? It's suddenly terrifying. And the police can't deal with them and everything. So, like I say, this is so simple, and yet nobody's ever done it before.
But there is what no, that's what shocked me. I must admit. I think Marvel's leaning a bit more heavily into it with Bloodhunt at the moment. But
Yeah,
that's what was unique about it. I did love that. And again, it's that. Why hasn't this been done before? It's one of those no-brainers. And like
yeah,
what you're building up in this sort of new story, it makes total sense for Sam to be going off on in one direction, possibly
sure.
redeem himself, possibly not. How many volumes down the road on something like Nightclub have you envisaged in your mind? And how much does that change over the? I mean, you said a lot of these write themselves, but how much does it change over the course of writing a series as you get into the heads of these characters a bit more?
Do you know the funny thing? I tend to change very little when I'm writing. Like what I do is I really think hard about a story before I start writing it. And I didn't used to do this. I used to sort of make it up as I was going along. When I was
Right,
working at Marvel, that's what I did. And that's exciting as well. You know, it's quite freewheeling to do it that way. But somebody said to me, and it was a great observation, they said, it's a bit like trying to build a house without doing the blueprint. And you're just putting bricks everywhere and you might get something kind of interesting, but that house also might fall down when it gets to the end. And that's what often happens with comic books, you know, that quite often you don't know what's happening in issue 6 when you're writing issue 2, and you
right,
wish you'd set something up in issue 2. So what I do is I block out a story for 2 weeks before I start writing. I 9 till 5 every day, Monday to Friday, I sit and I block out the story for 2 weeks, work out everything, work out dialogue, work out the pivotal scenes, work out the beginning, middle, and end, you know. So I kind of know everything that's going on with it. And
right.
Nightclub, I'll possibly just do these 2 volumes, but I might do a third. It certainly wouldn't be beyond that. Like, I get so bored, you know, like Marvel asked me to do Civil War 2, they asked me to do an Old Man Logan sequel and everything. And these things made Marvel a ton of money. And I was like, nah. And they were like, why not? And I was like, well, I've thought of new things now. I want to go
Yeah,
off
yeah.
and do my new things. And that's what I feel like with everything, even my own stuff.
And of course, new things segs us very nicely into your new chapter in your life with Dark Horse Comics. I'm
Yeah.
assuming that was bubbling up in the background for quite some time. And I know from your newsletter, you've got a lot of friends over there, a lot of people over there having a good time.
Yeah.
So, how long does something like this take? How long is it percolating? And, I suppose to be very blunt, why the move from Image to Dark Horse if you're able to talk about it at all, Mark?
It's very, very simple, actually. You know, just from a practical point of view, like our company got sold to Netflix in
Yeah,
2017, and Netflix already were working with Dark Horse. You know, so
right.
all the licensing people and everything. You know, I've got Stranger Things, The Witcher, all those Netflix projects. So from an accounts point of view, I know this is the most boring answer, you know, but from an accounts point of view, it makes life really simple. You know, plus in 20, 30 years time or whatever, you know, I'll not be here. You know, so like. So somebody will have to take care of all that stuff, and it will just be in house in one company. So Dark Horse was the logical place. Also, though, I think Dark Horse. I mean, I got on great with the Image guys. My 10 years were excellent there. And each company kind of has its pros and cons. You know, some people said to me that Image are very good on the monthly comics, but Dark Horse have got deeper mainstream bookstore penetration and everything. So because we are doing stuff that will hopefully become very mainstream characters over the next 10, 20, 30 years, then it'll be nice to have that bookstore presence in the US in particular. You know?
And you're promising big omnibuses as well. What might be the first omnibuses off the prints?
Well, the first one is actually out really soon. I can't remember exactly when, but the very first one collects Wanted and Big Game into one big supersized library edition. And that's what I like about Dark Horse too. You know, they're always looking at new ways to package the stuff. And I'd always wanted that, actually. I'd always wanted some big oversized hardcover or something, you know. So Dark Horse are just planning a whole line of these, you know. So they've got Wanted and, you know, the Alpha and the Omega of Miller World is the kind of first, and then the big crossover story, you know. So they're being collected into one thing. There's an Ambassadors one's out around the same time, and a collection of the Magic Order. I think they're being collected in 12-issue oversized volumes.
Right.
So it'll be the Olivia Coipel and the Stuart Immonen. then the Gigi Cavaniego with the DK Ruan and so on, you know, so there's going to be a series of those as library editions, which I can't wait for.
I
Just as a fan,
know.
my shelves behind me here,
I
you know,
know,
like
I know. I thought I
I
had to
love
make the effort somehow, some way, because otherwise there's just a black wall behind me. Now, also from a purely fan point of view, what I
Yeah.
like, I was really worried about Dark Horse once they lost Star Wars and Conan and everything else that Marvel seemed to suck up. So I'm so glad that a comic book company like Dark Horse has grown in strength, and I think your inclusion in that can only add to that strength and only add, I suppose, to that diversity in the marketplace. If we're not careful, it's just going to eventually condense down into DC or just Disney. Was
Yes,
that at the back of your mind when you make deals like this, or is it purely from the accounting point of view and also the way they're better at certain things than other things to break into different markets?
I think it's a multitude of things. You know, I think Dark Horse have got a lot of real strengths as well. I think they're good at selling your stuff in. Like I say, like I don't have as much time as I used to have, or what I used to do was I would, you know, sell my own books, you know, do all my own promos and all this kind of thing. And it's quite nice having somebody else doing this now, you know. So one of the nice things about Image is you get to keep all the money, but you also do all the work. You know, you're doing a
Right.
lot of the stuff yourself. And I just don't have that time. I don't have the bandwidth that I used to have because I work at the
Of
studio.
course.
But Dark Horse take care of everything, which is great, and they've done a terrific job with it, you know. So I think this is the beginning of a really good relationship, and I think there's going to be a contraction of companies. I think that's inevitable over the next year. But I think the one positive that's going to come from that is there's so many books out there just now, you know, because all that private equity money came in and everything over the last 10 years, where everybody was trying to find the new Marvel and everything. There's so many books that I think there's some books out there that are not being noticed. You know,
Yeah.
they're maybe selling 3,000 or 4,000 copies. They're maybe not in your local comic book shop and everything. I think the one good thing is it's going to consolidate the creators into a smaller number of places. So I think that the smaller number of companies, if there is an upside to that, is that you're going to have great writers and great artists on great characters again. You know, you're going to start seeing everybody coming together, hopefully. And less books is maybe no bad thing in some ways too, you know, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and we're producing more comics now than we did in any of the previous booms, which is quite an odd thing economically, you know. So I would like to see Marvel and DC do half as many books as they're currently doing. As painful as that'll be, you know, because I think you'll get better books as a result, and that's the same scene as well.
I mean, is this what you? I mean, obviously we're aging comic book fans. I've tried to bring my daughter up into comics. She was into manga at a certain point. She read the Beano like every teenager. She doesn't read comics as much now. My worries are where the next generation coming from. But then I see, and you might have a different answer. For me, it's penetration. And I'll come back to that after I hear your answer about what do you think is the future of comics, because you're better placed than I am.
Well, you know, as a reader, we're all readers, you know, and for me, I noticed years ago there was a cycle. Like everything else, there's a boom and there's a bust, and it actually is very, very rigid, the comics one. And everything can be going on, whether it's World War II, the Vietnam War, economic crashes, economic booms, the oil crisis, or whatever. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference. It follows this up and down period of sort of 10 good years followed by 10 bad years, you know. And I think we're just coming out of an amazing boom, you know, from a decade or so back, when you had these characters that nobody had ever heard of for the most part appearing in the biggest movies in Hollywood. You know, like who would have guessed Guardians of the Galaxy or Doctor Strange or any of these things would be big billion-dollar franchises? Here we are, you know. But inevitably, the downside of that is people want something new. So what was hot then immediately means that people are looking for something else. So there was a great 19 years. There was a phenomenal 19 years where Marvel was riding so high. But the downside of that is people are then just a bit fed up with that stuff. And you just don't see many kids. Very quickly, something goes cold. You don't see many kids walking about even with the T-shirts anymore. But I remember I was in Disneyland a few weeks ago with the children. And I was talking to a family at breakfast at the next table. And the wee boy I was talking to was 12. And I said, are you into Marvel movies? And he went, I've never seen one. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, they're not very good. You know, he says,
was he Amish or something?
He was just a totally regular kid. And he was sitting there wearing a Dragon Ball Z t-shirt or something, right? So I assumed he was a kid, right? And he said to me, he says, no, he says, my dad's into it. He says, but I'm not really into this. And the dad says, I've been trying to get him into it, but he just won't. And I was like, you must have seen Avengers Endgame. And he said to me something that blew me away. He said, Avengers, those last two Avengers movies came out when I was 6 and 7 years old, right? And I
Oh
was like,
God, yeah.
this kid was in high school now, right? And like he's 12. And I said, what, you were 6 and 7? And he said, yeah. And I said, and I had no idea what to make of them because it tied together 10, 15 years worth of continuity. So I didn't care. It wasn't for me, you know?
Yeah, of course.
I hadn't realized how much time had passed, really, you know, but that was this kid's lifetime
Wow,
ago.
yeah.
The last good Marvel movie came out, you know? So,
I'd agree with you on that one as well.
so it was really, really interesting. So what you realize though is I remember the 70s being like this. I remember hearing the 50s was like this. And I remember when I was breaking into the industry in the 90s, all the comic stores were closing, all the companies were slashing after staff, companies were closing down. So I think we're just in one of those periods. But the reason I'm always optimistic about comics is that all you need to do to make a comic is have a piece of paper and a pen. That's it. Like in a movie, you need a camera, you need 300
Yeah.
people, you need actors, you need approval. A comic, you literally just need a piece of paper and a pen. And there's never been a better time to get stuff in people's hands. Like when I was starting out as a teenager, I remember pricing, self-publishing my own comic, right? And I remember it was £1,800 then, right? To publish
Whoa.
1,800 quid for this print run that I wanted to do. And I was like, I can't afford this. There's no way I can do this. Whereas now you just scan it and put it up online
Yeah.
if you want, you know, or you can sell things through Amazon. Wherever you live in the world, you can get your hands next day in a graphic novel, you know, which is, or if you want it buy digitally, it's there instantly, you know. Or if you want to go to a Russian pirate site, it's there in 5 seconds.
You should have done it like this. I remember they spent 500 quid on photocopying and just went round all the pubs in Newcastle and they were sold out within minutes. But here's a pleasant story about infiltration. Now, of course, we're of that era where you could go into a comic book store and it wasn't just the spinner racks, it was all the British weekly comics of the stuff all chopped up. It was a plethora. Now, here's interesting. I know John Wagner had a bit of problem with the first lot of Rock of the Reds. He was very kind to me and gifted me 30 copies of Rock of the Reds, the graphic novels. Year 7, year 8, 12-year-old, 13-year-olds, they are lapping it up. Once they realized there was a sequel, they wanted to get their hands onto it. So there is that promise. I do know it takes a lot of effort. And this is one of many skills I've worked at, but this is the first skill where the graphic novels are taken off the shelves. Kids are reading Boy with the Striped Pajamas and picking up Mouse. Kids are reading 2000 AD or Roy the Rovers and picking up Rock of the Reds. There is a generation out there willing. We've just got to get the comics into their hands a little bit more.
Who could have anticipated manga being so mainstream? Like when I was growing up, manga was very niche when I was growing up. You know, like I was checking out Akira, you know, I knew who Otomo was and everything when I was maybe 18, but nobody I knew was reading that stuff. Maybe Frank Whiteley was the only other guy picking it up in my comic shop. And like, and you know, now I remember I took the kids down to the local bookshop and I overheard this conversation with some teenage girls who were standing beside us while my daughter was looking for the books she wanted. And I heard this girl saying, "Oh, do you like manga?" And this other girl said, "No, but I keep meaning to get into it." And I remember thinking that's really interesting because it was an aspirational fashion thing. It was something that they felt I should be into this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's a really powerful thing, you know, where nobody's trying to convince you to do it. You think, I feel a bit stupid not being into this. I need to get into this. And I kind of love that. I want comics to be like that. But who could have foreseen Blue Exorcist or Chainsaw Man or any of these things being bigger than Batman and Superman? And yet here we are.
Here we are. And when I go into what used to be called Nostalgia and comics in Birmingham, there's equally as many women in there and girls in there as there's boys nowadays. Well, obviously, a lot of that's got to do with the new influence of manga. And I know that in Nostalgia and Comics, they've got a manager specifically for the manga section. We've got Dave upstairs, who's been there a year, forever and ever and ever, like the rooks at the castle. It's a very well stocked shop, but it is interesting. I did a master's many years ago on female representation in comics. I remember sitting in Manchester in the comic shop there, used to be called Odyssey 7, and about 3 girls I could interview all day long. And again, it was the usual. I like Sandman. There wasn't that much manga back then. So there is a lot of promise, isn't there? And I think you're bringing a lot into it. The one comment we haven't talked about before we go completely off is the new Prodigy. I'm not going to say anything other than hits from the bong. When people get it, they'll understand. But again, I was sidetracked. The flashback, which is very integral to the story. Again, you think of Edison Crane as a certain person, and then you get this revelation. Thought, oh, I've not really thought about that actually.
Yeah.
And again, it's an interesting issue that happens at a very, very fast. In fact, it's such a fast pace, and so much happens. When I got to the final page, like, oh God! But I realised that was the intention of the pace of that comic.
Yeah, yeah. It's 28 pages as well. It's actually longer than most books. But
where,
it moves like a rocket. Yeah.
And where did you find that artist? Because again, you seem to be taking a lot of inspiration from Europe, which us in Britain might know a lot more about. But I love the fact you're introducing these great European artists to a very American audience a lot of the time. Was that intentional? Is that just by sheer coincidence? That's where all these.
It's just where my taste is. It's where my taste is. You know, like, I mean, Stefano Landini, the Italian artist doing Prodigy, he was recommended to me by Matteo Scalera, who's a good friend of mine. We did Space Bandits together and we did King of Spies. And I love Matteo. I can't wait to work with him again. He's absolutely amazing. And it's funny, I'll send emails out to the artist pals quite regularly, maybe every 2 months, right? And I always say there's maybe 40 artist pals who I'm really close with, who I talk to a couple of times a week or something, right? Because comics is a little family. I know online it looks like everybody's stabbing each other in the back and trying to get each other cancelled.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, such a small
weirdly,
part of it.
You have your pals and you talk to your comic pals all the time, right? And like, there's about 40 of us, and I always fire a little thing out and I say, guys, anyone I should know about that I'm missing, you know, because I always love to find new artists. And Matteo is the only guy who consistently comes back to me with somebody brilliant who I've never seen, you know. So he put me in touch with Matteo Buffagni, who drew the last Prodigy book and also doing the upcoming final volume of Magic Order. You know, he's an amazing artist. They'd done a couple of Star Wars things for Marvel, but most people hadn't seen his stuff. Very sort of Olivier Coipel meets Stuart Eminem kind of style. You know, and he put me in touch with Stefano Landini as well and said, look, this guy's great. He'd done a couple of Daredevils and things, but wasn't that well known in the US market. And he's been great. He's been absolutely brilliant. And I really wanted to do this story. It's the third Prodigy book. And it was, I like the idea of, you know, like Sherlock Holmes, you think he's the smartest guy there is. And then you find out he's got an older brother, you know, who's smarter than he is, the Mycroft of the situation. And I like the idea of Edison Crane's older, smarter brother. And this was our plan for the movies as well. You know, we're planning 3 movies of this too, you know.
Right.
So you introduce this guy who's Tony Stark, meets Indiana Jones and everything, you know, and then suddenly you find out down the line, okay, his dad's pretty amazing too. And then he's got a brother who's off the scale. And I'm a big conspiracy guy, right? I mean, I love conspiracy stuff. I love mythology as well, you know, especially crackpot kind of mythology, you know, the ancient astronaut stuff and everything. I love all that sort of thing. So somewhere like Prodigy's been a good chance for me to do all those kind of pulpy things that I really like lost civilizations, and all this, you know, secret continents you didn't know about and all this kind of thing. And this one has got an Edgar Rice Burroughs vibe. It's called Slaves of Mars.
It does feel very John Carter, doesn't it?
You know, there's something weird going on Mars. You know that there's a secret space program. Edison Crane's father is involved in it. He's been murdered, and now the 2 brothers have to come together and find out what the hell's going on. So this is a fun one.
And it's interesting, the dynamics between Edison and his father. He's not the favourite son by a long mile, is he?
Yeah. Well, there's something quite cool about him being the disappointing one. It's like, imagine you were Bruce Wayne and you were the disappointing son of Thomas Wayne. You're like, that's pretty cool.
But I'm looking forward to where this series goes.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you mentioned it, now that he's got other family members, shall we say, and how you've put enough hints about the Mars story in there that people aren't left at the end of the issue going, where's Mars in all of this then? Again, it's that great pacing. It's, you know, that thrown us into the middle of this flashback, trying to work it out. And then again, a nice surprise ending and surprise take on that family dynamic, shall we say.
Yeah, families are always the best things to write about. You know, because anything that happens between brothers and dads and so on, is so much more powerful than what happens between friends. So that's why Succession and Yellowstone and all these things just really work. So giving him a family humanizes him a little bit as well, because I think he could come across as a touch arrogant, like in the earlier ones, and it's a little hard to empathize. Whereas if he's not even the smartest, not even in the top 2 in his own family, then suddenly he's a bit more human.
I always like the fact that Lex Luthor always thinks he's the smartest person in the room. And I always have this fantasy about Lex Luthor walking into a boardroom and finding himself literally being taken over by the ultra humanite. I just want to see a big monkey in a business suit sitting in an office. Which takes us nicely onto your Superman idea. I've got about 8 minutes left. I don't know how much time you've got. But how much of the Superman idea that you've been dropping hints that you're wanting to write, how much is that again in your mind, given what you said about when you come to a project these days, you've pretty much got it down on paper?
Yeah. Well, last summer, I think it was, I was on holiday with the family in Dubai, I think it was. And I remember I was swimming in the sea and this Superman idea came to me. I was on my own in the middle of the ocean and I was swimming back to the boat and I was just thinking about the Superman idea. And it took me ages, actually. I was swimming for ages. And then when I got back to the boat, I had the whole thing in my head. And I said to my wife, have you got a piece of paper? She was like, no, we're on a boat. Of course I got a piece of paper. So I had to wait till we get back to dry land. And then I wrote it all down. And I just had this Superman concept. I was like, this is a cool Superman story. And, sometimes you're just lucky. It's a bit like being a spiritualist or something, like something just arrives, and the whole thing's there fully formed. And I just sat and I wrote it all down. And I was like, I'm going to do this at some point in my life. I'm under contract at Netflix just now. I can't do that. And I just mentioned this in passing on Twitter because, like everybody else, my every waking thought is up there on Twitter, and and then the woman who runs DC, Mary Javins, got in touch the next day and she said, is it true you've got a Superman idea? We'd love you to do this. And I was like, I really can't. I said, I'm under contract elsewhere. I said, but I'm actually going to try and do a 12-week carve out because I really fancied doing something just a little different. Maybe a work for hire job somewhere, just to shake things up a little, just do something a little bit different for me. And I said, I'll maybe do the Superman thing. And she was like, well, the door is wide open. And she introduced me to the editor. And I was like, cool. I said, but I can't talk to you guys until I arrange this at work. But then weirdly, Marvel said, they called me up and they said, and I'm good friends with a lot of the Marvel guys,
I can imagine.
I worked there for so long and it's all the same people who are still there, So they said, what the hell are you doing talking to DC, And I was like, well, I don't work for either of you guys, And they said, well, if you're going to take 12 weeks out, come and do something with us. And I was like, well, I've kind of done everything at Marvel, I've revamped the Avengers, I've, done all this, a big crossover, Civil War, everything. I said, I'm not going to top Civil War. It's like the biggest graphic novel sales in history, and the company. And they said, well, think of it, if something comes to mind. And then weirdly, about a week later, I had this idea, and it was an idea that would top Civil War. My estimate is it would sell about twice what Civil War did. And I've mentioned it to a couple of friends, and they said, oh my God, that's insane. You have to do this. And I was like, I know, I think I might. So then I had this realization where I thought, well, Superman is public domain in 9 years' time. My story actually works fine, whether it's owned by DC or not, but actually all I need is Superman. Everything else is new material around it. And I was like, I might just wait and I'll just do it in 9 years' time. So what I'll do is I'll start writing it in 5 years and I'll hire a great artist and give him a 4-year deadline to do the big 12-issue book. It would probably end up going into that. And I thought that means I could get somebody absolutely amazing, just give them that deadline. I'll pay them more money than Marvel and DC are paying them, steal them and take them away for a few years. And so then I might do this Marvel thing, I don't know, I may not, I'm not sure, but like this Marvel thing, if it works out, it would be pretty damn cool, and I think it would be, every now and then something happens that people are like, oh, that, suddenly the mainstream pays attention to comics, whether it was Watchmen, Dark Knight, an event of some kind. This is as big an event as could possibly be in comics, without giving too much away.
Of course.
Within the parameters of what we can do in comics, this is as big an event as could be done in the modern world, I think.
Wow.
So it's a good one,
But you're not going to be able to wait them to come into a public domain, are you?
No, no, I actually did look that up. I did look that up. But no, if I do this, I'll do it this year, later this
Right.
year. You
Oh,
know,
okay. And
I'll
you've
do it
got
quite.
time because obviously we talked about the
Yeah,
3 series you're going to
yeah,
release. I know there's 2 more in the pipeline. I take it
yeah.
they're good to go themselves, then, are they?
Oh yeah, they're all done. Yeah, I mean, I do
Cool.
everything a year ahead of time. You know,
Right.
so the Marvel project, if I do it, I've got 12 weeks of a window to do something. You know, and I might do something else entirely. I don't know. But if I do this Marvel thing, I'll probably write that at the end of this year. Maybe it comes out next summer or something. You know, but we'll see. It could be if this happens. It'll be absolutely gigantic, and that'll be.
Wow.
I think it'll be good for the industry, you know.
That's
And I would give my fee. You know, I always said I wouldn't do work for hire, but I would give my fee to charity. I wouldn't keep any of the money. I'd just give the fee to
wow.
charity and just do it for the fun of it. Just do it for pure fun, you know.
That's beautiful, isn't it? It's great, I suppose, to be in that position where you're able to give back something like that. You are able to sort of shake up the industry in a good way, bring people's eyes back onto it. You've always been a great self promoter, and I think that's a good thing. As a loudmouth person myself, I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever.
You've got
And
to
I,
if you're
and I,
selling. Nobody
yeah,
else is going to support your stuff. You've got
but
to
I
do
think
it.
it's a good voice for comics as well. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? People, I told a lot of people today, Mark Millar, they might not have heard you, but the minute you say kick ass, oh right, okay. I'm talking to teachers; they don't know anything. I was just excited because you're literally one of the last big whales I ever had to grab in interview. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to wind it up now, Mark. I'm going to say in advance, thank you for your time because I've been a long time waiting and I've really enjoyed this interview. I'm not going to just let you go quite yet. I am
yeah.
going to, I was shocked a year ago getting prepped for this interview. I didn't realize Nightclub 2 finished a year ago. It feels like it only finished a few months ago. And
Crazy. Yeah. We're getting old. Yeah.
well, I think that's it. But also that the big game throughout those months as
Yeah.
well. So it doesn't feel like there's been that much of a break
Yeah.
between big game and you now starting up again in the summertime when I've got the best of opportunities to be able to sit down and review comics where it's quite busy juggling all of that during the year. So you're making this old fanboy happy. I know you're making younger people happy. And what's something, I mean, we talked about Superman, we talked about Marvel. Are there any goals because you're in a position where you can do whatever you want or any itches you still left to scratch?
I always have ideas for things, like I always have ideas for characters that I love, but I'll never do them really. I'll maybe do, I've got a Green Lantern idea, but I'll save it till it's public domain in 12 years' time or whatever, So like the beauty of time speeding up as you get older is that'll go in the blink
Yeah,
of an
it
eye,
is.
yeah, from a fanboy point of view, no, I've been very lucky. I've actually
Yeah.
got a chance to write pretty much everything I've wanted to. I've got my Batman story, but again, I'll wait and just do my Batman when it's public domain and stuff.
Right.
I think, I'd quite fancy at some point, just out of curiosity, because it feels so in my wheelhouse, is to do one Kickstarter project. I think it would be really fun to do a Kickstarter. The thing I like about it is I like the Wild West of it. Like one thing I'm good at is promotion, right? Creating something new and getting out there and selling it as a Kickstarter would be a really interesting experience, and to try and do something nobody's done before. I look at guys like Eric July and all that, and I'm so impressed with what they've done. I think maybe at some point in the future try one of those. I think that could be
Okay,
pretty cool.
yeah. You'll have the fan base. Right, less than a minute. So I'm going to thank you now, Mark. Hope to speak to you again. All the best for the summer and the future, and I'm sure we'll speak soon. Cheers,
Yes,
fella.
sir. All the best then.